A torrential, grey rain falls relentlessly on the battlefield, turning the world into a sea of churned mud and dark, brackish water. In the centre of a blasted-out crater, 3 figures huddle behind the meagre cover of a shattered rock formation. One is a Jabiimi nationalist, a man with a grim, determined face streaked with mud, his rifle held close. He seems at home in the misery. Beside him, a Nemoidian officer shivers, his ornate but mud-soaked uniform offering little protection, his wide, red-gold eyes darting around in terror at every explosion. On his other side sits a B-1 battle droid, completely still, its chasers streaked with grime, seemingly unaffected by the cold or the rain. A sparking, half-buried comm unit nearby crackles to life. Through the static, a distorted voice cuts through, a clone trooper's, speaking in crisp, coded chatter. It sounds close. The Nemoidian flinches violently, his breathing becoming a series of panicked, audible gasps. The Jabiimi fighter turns to him, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "Quiet, you want them to find us?" The Nemoidian's voice was a trembling whisper. "I can't stop thinking about them out there, in the rain." The fighter studies him for a long moment, a flicker of something between pity and annoyance in his eyes. "Then think about something else," he says. "Something worse. Every soldier has a ghost story from this war. Tell one. It might make the ones in the mud seem less real for a minute." The Nemoidian just shakes his head, too terrified to speak. The droid's head swivels with a faint servo whine to face them. "I can provide a relevant data file," it says, "from a recovered memory core, a previous deactivation. The file is designated the one who didn't make a sound." The Nemoidian officer and the Jabiimi fighter both turn to look at the commando droid. The Nemoidian seems confused, but the fighter gives a grim, slight nod. The BX's optical sensor glows faintly as it accesses the file. This memory core was recovered from a B-1 unit designated 947, the droid begins. His platoon was on a reconnaissance mission on the forest moon of Duxon. 12 droids, charting a path to a new landing zone. The mission was classified as low risk. The probability of hostile contact was calculated at less than 4%. The world, as viewed through the optical sensor of Unit 947, is a grainy, green tinted image. The rain is a constant, drumming hiss against a metallic chassis. The trees on Duxon are colossal, ancient things, their trunks twisted and black like charred bone, pressing in on all sides. Hydraulic legs clank a steady, predictable rhythm on the wet ground. They're scanning for heat signatures, for energy profiles of machines, for sounds of a conventional army. They are scanning for the war they were programmed to fight. Then, the droid at the absolute rear of the formation emits a short, sharp burst of static. The optical sensor of 947 swivels back just in time to record its comrade's legs being suddenly yanked off the ground. The unit is pulled vertically into the pitch-black canopy of the trees with incredible speed. There is a single metallic shriek as its chaser scrapes against a branch, and then it's gone. Its indicator on the shared HUD simply vanishes. The remaining units halt. Their heads swivel upwards, their photoreceptors unable to penetrate the thick, dripping leaves above. A challenge has been introduced. The threat is not on the ground. They break formation, bunching together in the middle of the path. A fatal error. From the canopy directly above, a small metallic cylinder drops into the center of their circle. Before their processors can classify it, it detonates. The memory log of 947 flickers and then fades out. When 947's optical sensor reboots, the scene is chaos. 2 more of its comrades are on the ground, their chasers brutally torn apart by a blade. The attacker is nowhere to be seen. Having been attacked by a foe they could not see or hear, their programming defaults to suppressive fire on the only logical origin point of the threat, the surrounding darkness. They fire blindly into the trees and the canopy above. One by one, the ghost in the trees continues its work. A B1 on the edge of the group is suddenly dragged sideways into the undergrowth, its cries cut short. Another turns just in time to see the enemy. A human insurgent in light tactical gear emerges from behind a tree to punch a vibroblade through its chest. There is a high-frequency grinding shriek as the blade tears through the droid's internal mechanisms. Soon, only the subject, 947, remains. It stands alone in a circle of its own dismantled comrades. It spins in place, its rifle raised, its head twitching, its vocalizer stuck in a loop. Hostile, hostile, hostile. The forest goes quiet. The rain softens to a drizzle. The B1 stands for a full 30 seconds, its built-in night vision cutting a path through the silent trees. The B1 stands for a full 30 seconds. It then glances past a thick tree trunk and its photoreceptors catch something, a figure, perfectly still. The recording from 947's optical sensor lurches as it finally acquires a clear target. It raises its rifle. The insurgent raises his own combat knife. The data stream terminates there. A Separatist scavenger team found the memory core 2 standard rotations later. The unit itself was part of a grotesque sculpture. Its torso was found impaled on a sharpened stake, its head positioned to overlook the patrol route. The other units were found in similar states, their severed limbs arranged in ritualistic spirals. The gorilla had used its parts to create territorial markers, warnings. The droid falls silent, the monotone of its vocalizer replaced once again by the hiss of the rain. For a long moment, none of them move. The Jabimi fighter lets out a slow breath he didn't realize he was holding. The Nemoidian officer shudders, pulling his arms tight around himself. The silence, he whispers, his voice trembling. That's what's so frightening. But there are different kinds of silence. The silence of a jungle when a predator is near is one thing. The silence of a 3-kilometer wide fortress when its heart stops beating, that's another thing entirely. That's the silence of the void. The fighter and the droid both turn their heads to look at him. The Nemoidian takes a shuddering breath and begins his own story. I was a junior lieutenant, assigned to the bridge of the battleship Prophet's Ascent, a Lucrehult class. 3 kilometers wide, bristling with turbo lasers, defended by 2 full wings of vulture droids, we were untouchable. My job was simple. I monitored energy expenditure for the portside batteries. I was 1,000 light years from any real danger. We were commanding the blockade of the Renvar system, a routine operation. The Republic fleet was small and insignificant. We engaged them at maximum range. Distant flashes of red and blue. Our tactical droid predicted victory in 37 minutes. Then, the universe went quiet. All over the ship, systems began short-circuiting, crackling with blue energy, and then everything died. The deep, infernal roar of the hypermatter reactor faded to nothing. The thousands of blinking lights on our consoles flickered and went dark one by one. The hum of the life support, the system that maintained the very air we were breathing, ceased. And then the artificial gravity failed. One moment I was at my station, the next I was floating, my datapad drifting away into the sudden, absolute darkness of the bridge. The only light was the cold, distant stars outside the viewport. The only sound was the panicked, muffled shouts of the other Nemoidians floating helplessly in the dark. We'd been disabled by an ion cannon salvo, concentrated enough to burn through our shields. Ordinarily, such an outage would be short-lived, but the short-out must have critically damaged something important because they couldn't restart the reactor. For a long time, There was only the cold and the dark. Then, new sounds began. The first was a low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the hull. Magnetic clamps. They were boarding us. The second sound was a high-pitched, piercing screech of a plasma cutter slicing through 2 decks below the bridge. Our captain, a veteran of 100 trade disputes, tried to rally us. We were armed with our standard issue holdout blasters. We gathered near the main blast door of the bridge, a wall of terrified, floating career officers listening to the sounds of the hunt coming for us over the comms. The bridge blast door exploded inward as a breaching charge vaporized it. The force sent us tumbling through the zero-gravity darkness. Before my eyes could adjust, the room was filled with the beams of their helmet lamps, cutting through the dark like the eyes of predators. Our captain, in a fit of foolish pride, fired his tiny blaster. The red bolt illuminated the scene for a horrifying instant, showing a dozen white-armored demons floating in the doorway. His shot went wide. Theirs didn't. A dozen blue bolts answered, and the captain's body convulsed and then drifted away. We panicked. We all did. We fired our pathetic little blasters, and our red energy bolts just gave them perfect targets to aim at in the dark. I saw the officer who had been standing next to me at my station just minutes before, illuminated by his own blaster flash before a blue bolt took him in the chest. I saw our tactical droid torn apart by a volley of fire before it could even calculate a response. I hid. I pushed off a console and sent myself tumbling into the darkest corner of the bridge behind the captain's dead chair. I watched them hunt the survivors. They moved with a chilling, silent grace, their helmet lamps sweeping the room. I survived by hiding in a garbage chute for 10 hours. The Nemoidian finishes his story, pulling his collar tighter, shivering in the rain, lost in the memory of the cold, silent dark. The Jabimi fighter gives a gruff, almost imperceptible nod. "So you hid," he says. The B1 droid tilts its head. "Analysis," it states. "The use of concentrated ion cannon fire can facilitate a ship-to-ship boarding action significantly. A logical and efficient strategy." Efficient? The Nemoidian sputters, his voice a panicked squeak. "Is that all this is to you? A calculation? They executed my entire command staff, left us to die in the dark, and you call it efficient?" The Jabimi fighter places a steadying hand on the Nemoidian's shoulder. "It's a droid," he says. "It only understands what it can calculate." "But that's just it," the Nemoidian insists, turning his wide, fearful eyes from the droid to the fighter. "You think you can understand it all, don't you? Put it all in your neat little data files. But what about a threat that isn't logical? What about a Jedi? Is it efficient when one man breaks an entire army?" He takes a ragged breath, the memory of another tale rising in his mind. I had to process the debriefing of an Umbara militiaman once. A survivor. His world was a fortress of perpetual night. They were masters of the dark. Then the Republic sent in their monsters. The Nemoidian's voice drops, taking on the haunted, second-hand cadence of the soldier whose story he's now telling. The Umbaran soldier's story began with pride. His world, Umbara, is a planet of perpetual twilight gloom. Their sun is weak, hidden behind a thick nebula, and the surface lives in a constant state of pre-dawn darkness. The forests are glowing, alien landscape of bioluminescent flora. He told me his people were masters of this darkness. They were the shadows. Their technology was advanced, their soldiers equipped with pressure suits and sophisticated night vision that could see in spectra the clones couldn't. When the Republic invasion began, they were confident. "The clones," he had said, his voice full of remembered arrogance, "are creatures of the light. They will be blind here. We will hunt them in our forests and they'll never see us coming." For the first rotation, they were right. Several Republic battalions landed, and their brilliant white armor was a death sentence in the glowing forests. The Umbaran militia were ghosts, picking them off from the shadows with precise plasma rifles. The clones were clumsy, disoriented, their helmet lamps just creating perfect targets. The Umbarans were winning. They believed the war would be over in a week. But they hadn't accounted for the Jedi. The Umbaran said he was leading a flanking maneuver through a grove of glowing fungi when a single figure walked out of the darkness. It held a blade of brilliant blue light that illuminated the forest in pulsing, unnatural waves. The Umbaran squad, 50 strong, opened fire. The Jedi was a blur. He moved with a speed that defied physics, his blue blade a whirlwind of energy, deflecting every single one of their plasma bolts back at them with perfect, impossible accuracy. Men were falling, killed by their own redirected fire. The Jedi shattered their line single-handedly. The Umbaran's final memory was of the last stand of his battalion. They were dug into a deep trench, ready for a final, desperate defense. With no warning, the Jedi simply appeared. He leaped from the darkness, a horned demon, landing in the middle of their trench. He was a whirlwind of blue light. The Umbaran story became fragmented then, a series of horrific, disconnected images. A comrade bisected by a spinning blue blade. The sight of the Jedi tearing a whole squad's weapons from their hands with just a simple wave. The Umbaran survived only because a heavy weapons emplacement exploded nearby, burying him under a pile of dirt and the bodies of his comrades. He lay there in the dark, feigning death for hours. He listened as the Jedi and his clones finished the job. The Neimoidian finishes the story, his voice a choked whisper. The Jabbimi fighter stares into the darkness of their own rainy battlefield, his face grim. For the first time, he looks unnerved. The droid tilts its head. Analysis, it says, its voice flat. The introduction of a Jedi represents a tactical variable with a 99.8% probability of mission failure for conventional infantry. The logical response is to withdraw. The Neimoidian lets out a sound that's half sob, half laugh. It's not that simple. It's never that simple. The Jabbimi fighter nods slowly, his eyes still scanning the darkness. The bridge jockey's right, he says, his voice low and gravelly. That's the difference, Clanker. An organic soldier knows when logic has failed. He can feel it. He can even break orders if it means survival. You can't. Your programming is a cage. The droid swivels its head to face the fighter. Its single photoreceptor seems to dim for a moment as it processes the statement. Your assessment is correct, the droid states, its voice a flat monotone. A battle droid cannot break orders. It cannot disobey a command from a superior, even if its own senses indicate the command will lead to certain destruction. This absolute obedience is considered paramount by our commanders. The droid pauses and the silence in the crater feels heavy. The clones have learned to make it our most catastrophic failure. I will provide another data file from the memory core of a B1 squad leader designated 773. It's a study in the weaponization of a droid's core programming. The memory of Unit 773 begins with a state of perfect tactical readiness. His company of 200 B1s was assigned to defend a critical choke point on the besieged world of Centaurus. They were positioned in a fortified redoubt overlooking a narrow canyon pass, a perfect kill box. The tactical droid commanding the operation had assured them of a 99.3% probability of success against any projected Republic assault. 773's log shows its squad is perfectly positioned. Through 773's optical sensors, the enemy comes into view. A massive column of clone troopers, supported by ATTE walkers, advances directly toward their position. The sight is formidable, but expected. 773's log shows it calmly acquiring targets, calculating blaster trajectories, and preparing for a massive but winnable firefight. Then, a new directive arrives. The signal is a Priority 1 command encrypted with the authentication codes of Separatist High Command itself. The audio is broadcast directly into every droid's processor, a calm, synthesized voice their programming identifies as belonging to Count Dooku. The order is simple and absolute. Hold your fire. I repeat, hold your fire. Cease all hostile action. A ceasefire is being negotiated. On 773's HUD, all targeting reticles vanish, replaced by a single blinking icon. Hold fire. Command absolute. Its internal log is a storm of logical conflicts. The clones continue to advance. They are now within effective range. The squad leader's comms log fills with confused queries from its subordinate units. Commander, we have clear targets. They are not halting. The command is absolute. Hold your fire. But they are advancing. They are not honoring any ceasefire. Request clarification. Negative. Hold your fire. 773 is forced by its own programming to relay and enforce the suicidal order, even as its own tactical analysis screams that the order is a fatal error. 773's processor is now caught in a catastrophic loop. The temperature of its CPU is rising, flagged in red on its HUD. Its weapon arm can be seen twitching, a physical manifestation of two contradictory, absolute commands warring for control of its motor functions. It must not fire. It must fire. It does neither. It is paralyzed, a prisoner of its own perfect obedience. The clones reach the edge of the redoubt. They stop, they take aim, and the B1s do nothing. They simply stand in their perfect firing lines, their rifles pointed uselessly at the ground as the clone army prepares to execute them. As 773 is processing this total collapse of logic, one final chilling message comes from the compromised tactical droid commander channel. The voice is the same, but the cadence is wrong. It's faster, almost amused. Good work, Clankers. Keep it up. Clankers. A derogatory organic term. It's the final piece of data. 773's processor finally resolves the paradox. The voice of his commander, his source of absolute logic, is an imposter. But the realization comes at the exact same moment the clones open fire. The memory log is a brutal feed of friendly IFF tags being extinguished one after another in a wave of blue blaster fire. 773's final recording is the sight of a clone trooper walking calmly up to it, raising a blaster pistol to its head and pulling the trigger. The recording terminates in a flash of pure white light. The memory core of 773 was recovered from the wreckage of the redoubt. It was one of 200 units deactivated at that location. Analysis confirmed that the tactical droid commander for that sector had its signal hijacked by a Republic slicing team. The droid finishes its story. The rain seems to beat down harder on the metal shell of the crater. The Neimoidian stares at the B1, a new intellectual terror in his eyes. The Jabimi fighter just shakes his head. "They turned your own brain into the cage," he mutters. "That's a dirty trick." "A cage of logic," the Neimoidian whispers, horrified. "To be defeated without even being able to fight back. It's monstrous." "It is," the fighter agrees, his voice low and hard. "But there are other kinds of cages. Some are made of logic, others are made of metal and darkness." He looks from the droid to the Neimoidian. "I've seen elite soldiers, specialists, who thought they were smarter and faster than any clone, walk into a cage they didn't even see until it was too late. I fought alongside a squad of Gossam commandos during the Battle of Kothwas. They thought they were the hunters. They learned that even a hunter can be lured into a trap." Now, the Gossams were good, I'll give them that. Smallest sentients I'd ever seen go to war, thin as reeds, with these wide, dark eyes that saw everything. They were proud. Their whole strategy was built on the idea that no one ever looks up. They could get into any facility through the ventilation shafts, places no human and certainly no clanking droid could ever fit. They saw themselves as ghosts. Their mission was to infiltrate a Republic data depot on a high-orbit station above Botherwood, a clean, sterile, high-tech facility. They were supposed to plant a slicing device in the central command hub, a simple in-and-out job. I was part of the diversionary assault team on the lower levels. We were making a lot of noise, drawing all the attention, while the 5 Gossams slipped in through a maintenance duct on the station's exterior. The Gossam commander, a cocky little fellow named Rix, kept his comm channel open to ours. We could hear their progress. We heard the scrape of their bodies in the narrow vents, the quiet clicks of their gear, and the Rix's whispered reports. Passing Deck 7, no resistance. Approaching primary conduit, all clear. They were moving deep into the station's guts, and they were laughing about how easy it was. Then, the reports started to get strange. Rix's voice lost its arrogant edge. Command, the patrol routes on Deck 4 are empty. The clones aren't where they're supposed to be. But we told him our assault was pulling all the guards to the lower levels. It was the logical explanation. But then he reported the markings. Strange, almost invisible scorch marks on the inside of the vents themselves, and then a sound. A faint, rhythmic, almost inaudible clicking that seemed to be coming from deeper within the vent system. They reached the main junction that led to the command hub, and then the trap was sprung. We heard it all over the comms. A series of deep, heavy clangs as reinforced blast doors slammed shut, sealing off every exit from the ventilation system. They were trapped. A second later, the lights in the vents went out, plunging them into absolute pitch black darkness. Their comm channel erupted in panicked, overlapping chatter. Then we heard Rix's terrified whisper. "Contact! We have contact! In the vents with us!" The clicking sound on the comm grew louder. It was closer. Then one of the Gossams screamed. "Vaughn is down!" Rix yelled. "Something's in here. It's..." His transmission was cut off. The comm channel went dead silent. The rest of the story I got from the lone survivor, a young commando named Gert who managed to pry open a service hatch and fall 3 stories. He said that after the scream, the darkness in the vents was absolute. They couldn't see anything. They were firing their small holdout blasters wildly, the bolts ricocheting off the narrow walls in a terrifying, disorienting light shadow. In those brief, strobing flashes, they saw them. Clones, in armor as black as the void, with glowing blue visor slits. Shadow troopers. Their armor was designed to absorb sensor scans and light, making them nearly invisible. The Gossams, the masters of stealth, were being out-stealthed in their own chosen territory. The clicking sound was the magnetic clamps of the clones' boots, allowing them to crawl along the walls and ceilings of the vents like giant black spiders. The hunters had become the hunted. Gert told me it was a slaughter. The clones were bigger, stronger, and they could see in the dark. They used vibro knives. He said the last thing he saw before he jumped was his commander, Rix, cornered at a T-junction by 2 of the shadow troopers. The clones had known about the Gossam's plan all along. They turned the vents, the Gossam's greatest advantage, into a narrow, dark metal tomb. They let the hunters walk right into the cage before revealing that they were the bigger, better predator. The Jabimi fighter finishes his tale, then stares at the B-1 droid. "That's the horror of the clones," he says. "You think you found their weakness, a way to be smarter, faster, better, and then you find out they have a clone for that, too. One that's smarter and faster and better than you in every way." The Jabimi fighter's grim pronouncement hangs in the air, a chilling testament to the Republic's ruthless specialization. The B-1 droid processes the statement with a tilt of its head. Analysis. The Republic's use of specialized units is a tactically sound doctrine designed to counter and exploit the specific weaknesses of its opponents. The Neimoidian shivers, pulling his damp uniform tighter, as if the B1's cold logic is a physical blast of cold air. They have a clone for the dark, he whispers, his voice shaking, and they have a clone for the fire. I had to review an after-action report from a Kurivar Fusilier, a survivor from the fighting on Morja. His defensive line was unbreakable, he said. For days, they held back the Republic advance, but the clones decided they had a better way of dealing with his line. They would just melt it. The story from the Kurivar survivor began with confidence. His position was perfect. He and his 300 comrades were dug into a series of reinforced subterranean bunkers connected by a deep trench line. Their fields of fire were perfect, overlooking a barren plain that had become a graveyard for our droids. For 3 days, they had held that line. They were unbreakable. The attack came at dusk on the 4th day. It began with a heavy artillery barrage. The Kurivar, safe in their reinforced bunkers, hunkered down and waited for the inevitable infantry assault. But the shells that rained down didn't explode with kinetic force. They burst in the air, releasing a thick, black, oily smoke that hugged the ground. In minutes, the entire battlefield, including their own trench line, was blanketed in a fog so dense that the Fusilier said he couldn't see the bunker wall 5 meters away. Visibility was 0. The shelling stopped. A deep, unnatural silence fell, broken only by the muffled, panicked shouts of his comrades over the comms. They were blind. Then a new sound began. A deep, guttural whoosh, like a furnace igniting somewhere out in the smoke. The horror started at the far end of the trench line. The Fusilier heard it over the comms. A sudden, unified burst of screaming abruptly cut off. Then another bunker went silent. Then another. Something was moving through the smoke, and it was cleansing their line, bunker by bunker. His own turn came moments later. A shadow appeared in the firing slit of his bunker, a shape made darker than the smoke around it. Before they could fire, a torrent of liquid orange fire erupted into the confined space. The Fusilier's report became a frantic, terrified scramble of words then, trying to describe a horror his logical, soldier's mind couldn't process. The fire was a sticky, chemical gel that clung to every surface. He said the sound of his squad mates screaming as the fire consumed them was a sound his mind would never be able to erase. He survived because he was in a rear chamber, and the initial blast threw a metal supply crate in front of the doorway, shielding him. He huddled in the dark, his scales cracking from the superheated air, listening to the deep guttural roar of the flamethrower just outside as it methodically burned everything in the main room to slag. When the roaring finally stopped, he waited in the suffocating heat for what felt like an eternity. He eventually crawled out from behind the crate. The main room of his bunker was a blackened, melted tomb. Through the firing slit, he saw them. Figures walking calmly through the dissipating smoke. Republic flame troopers. Their specialized armor was scorched black, but completely immune to the heat. The Neimoidian finishes his story, his hands shaking as he speaks. The Jabiimi fighter is silent, his face a hard mask, acknowledging a horror that even he respects. The B1 droid tilts its head. Analysis, it states, its voice unchanged. Incendiary weapons have a 99.9% effectiveness rating against organic infantry in fortified positions. My Chasis, however, is rated to withstand temperatures of up to 1,900 degrees for a limited duration. This specific threat is not applicable to my design. The Neimoidian stares at the droid, aghast at the monstrously indifferent logic. The comment, meant to be a simple statement of fact, is perhaps the most chilling thing he's heard all night. The Nemoidian takes a shuddering breath, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I once had to file a sanitized incident report from a foundry on the planet Metalorn. The official record spoke of a catastrophic malfunction, but some of the raw data logs, written by a Skakoan engineer, told a different story. The story of a ghost in his own perfect machine. The engineer's final log began in a place of perfect logical beauty. The Metalorn foundry was a marvel of Separatist automation, a silent, efficient, endless ballet of creation. The engineer was there for a routine diagnostic, accompanied by a single assistant, a captured Republic astromech supposedly reprogrammed for our cause. His log entries from the first few hours are calm, filled with technical data. He is in the central control room when the lockdown begins. Red lights bathe the facility in a silent, pulsing glow. Heavy blast doors slam shut. The factory's synthesized voice announces Security Protocol Omega initiated. External threat detected. The engineer notes in his log that he feels perfectly safe. Then, the accidents begin. His log becomes frantic. He records a massive automated vat of molten durasteel tipping without a command, consuming a team of maintenance droids below. He logs it as a 1 in a million system failure. Minutes later, a high-powered laser welder on the B2 assembly line misfires, its beam slicing through a row of newly assembled, inactive super battle droids. He notes the statistical improbability of 2 such failures occurring in sequence, and he begins to suspect sabotage. His log shows him trying to access the factory's central computer, only to find the security protocols are actively fighting him, rewriting and corrupting the very data he's trying to access. The sabotage is happening in real time. He pulls up the security camera archives, and the log entry is simple: visual confirmation. The astromech unit was present at the control panel for both incidents. It is the Saboteur. At that exact moment, his log registers a new entry. The astromech, which had been quietly working at a console on the other side of the control room, turns its domed head to look directly at him. The lockdown was to trap the engineer in. The final entries in his log are a nightmare of technological horror. The engineer is sealed in the control room, but the astromech has the entire factory as its weapon. His log is a stream of panicked text. Automated assembly arms attempting to breach control room viewport. Internal laser turrets have been activated. They are firing on my position. He is being hunted by the factory itself. Every logical system he had come to inspect now turned into a tool of murder by a single malicious intelligence. His final, desperate log entry describes the small, unassuming astromech droid rolling toward him. A small, high-energy plasma cutter, the kind used for delicate ship repairs, has extended from one of its panels. The factory's calm, synthesized voice speaks one last time over the intercom, an audio file embedded in the engineer's final log. Sanitation cycle initiated. The Nemoidian finishes his story, his breathing heavy. The Jabimi fighter looks from the Nemoidian to the B1 and back again. So they didn't even send a soldier, the fighter says. They sent a mechanic. The B1 in the crater remains motionless for a moment, then tilts its head. Analysis, it states. The astromech unit successfully neutralized a high-value manufacturing facility and its organic supervisor with minimal resource expenditure. An effective sabotage operation. Its methods were logical. The Jabimi fighter listens, his face tightening into a grimace of contempt. Logical, he spits, the word an insult. Maybe, but it's a coward's tactic. Hiding behind a machine, turning a factory against one man. He shakes his head. That's not the only way they break you. They have their hidden knives, but they also have their perfect soldiers. The ones they send in when they want to make a statement. The Nemoidian looks up, a new fear in his eyes. The ARC troopers. The ARCs, the fighter confirms, his voice low and hard. My brother was a mercenary for the banking clan on Muunilinst. He said their droid army was the best money could buy. He said they were winning, until the Republic sent in 10 clones to do the work of an army. The Jabimi fighter's voice shifts, taking on the tone of a story told and retold piece of dark family history. My brother's story always started the same way, with the gleam of the city. Muunilinst was a monument to wealth. Gleaming, impossibly tall towers, clean streets, and defensive artillery that looked like it had been polished that morning. He was part of a crew for a heavy turbo laser emplacement at the base of the main banking clan headquarters. When the Republic fleet arrived, the battle was exactly what the strategists had predicted. Their standard clone troopers landed and were met by the banking clan's B-1 armies and hailfire tanks. The Separatist lines were holding. For a time, they were even winning. They were confident. Then, they sent in the ARCs. It started with a single gunship that flew a little bit differently from the others. It flew straight through their anti-aircraft fire, weaving between explosions with an organic grace that was terrifying to watch. It was brought down by rocket fire, but that was only the beginning. 10 men emerged from the wreckage, taking out the snipers covering the plaza and losing only a single man. My brother, watching from his perch a kilometer away, said the battle changed instantly. The chaos of the fight below seemed to focus. The 9 remaining ARCs moved with a speed and precision that his mind could barely follow. He described them as a pack of hunting animals. Every single shot from their blasters was a precise, killing blow to a droid's optical sensor. He watched as this tiny squad of 9 clones systematically dismantled the city's defenses. 2 of them used grappling lines to scale the side of the skyscraper, eliminate a sniper's nest, and then use the nest's own cannon to take out the hailfire tanks in the street below. Another 2 hijacked a speeder and used it to strafe the command droids, shattering the B-1's chain of command and leaving them wandering aimlessly in the crossfire. They were always flanking, always attacking from an angle you didn't expect. They coordinated with perfect, silent hand signals. The true horror, my brother said, came when they turned their eyes on him. The ARC squad needed to take out the central command and control tower, his building. Their target was the heavy turbo laser he was crewing. He said they never saw them coming. The ARC captain fired a grappling line directly into the side of the tower itself. While the gunners were trying to acquire targets on the distant battlefield, the captain ascended to the 100-meter tower in under 10 seconds. He landed on the platform, his dual pistols already drawn, before the gunners inside the armored cockpit even registered he was there. The rest of the crew was dead before they could even process what they'd just seen. My brother told me he didn't even try to fight. He dropped his weapon and ran. He was the only one who survived. The Jabimi fighter finishes his brother's story, the second-hand memory still raw. The Nemoidian is now faced with a new horror, an enemy that is simply perfectly better. The droid processes the data. Analysis, it says, its voice flat and toneless. The ARC Trooper program represents a 700% increase in combat effectiveness over a standard clone unit. Recommended tactical response when encountering ARC Trooper presence: immediate withdrawal. No countermeasure is deemed statistically viable. The fighter looks at the droid, a strange, almost sad look in his eyes. Sometimes, he says, that's the only logical response. The droid remains motionless for a moment, its photoreceptors staring out into the rain. Your agreement is logical, the droid states, its voice cutting through the quiet. The ARC Trooper represents the peak of the Republic's deliberate weaponization of the organic soldier. They are a designed, intentional threat. The droid swivels its head to look at the 2 organics huddled in the mud. However, not all of the Republic's most effective weapons are designed. Some are created by accident. The following data file is a record of such an event. It demonstrates that the most terrifying threat isn't always a perfect soldier, but a simple, unpredictable chemical reaction. This memory is my own. The memory is from the world New Bornalex. Before this crater, there was another, a trench miles from here. It was my third rotation in the same trench. The battle had been raging for days. The mud was a permanent state of being. The clones of the Galactic Marines were dug in across a field of black mud and wreckage, and our objective was to push them back. We had been trying for a week. Wave after wave, we had been sent over the top, as the organics say. Wave after wave, we had been cut down. I was part of the 9th wave on the 3rd day. My processor would calculate the probability of survival with each new assault, and each time, the number would shrink. The artillery barrage had been relentless for hours. Then, it stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the explosions. The rain continued to fall, a soft, steady hiss, and with the silence came the mist. It was not like a natural fog, which is grey. It was a low, rolling vapor, the colour of rust, and it seemed to cling to the mud, flowing into our trench like a slow, silent tide. My atmospheric sensors initially classified it as harmless atmospheric particulate, a byproduct of the Republic's artillery. The droid next to me, a unit I had been fighting beside for 53 standard hours, was the first. His vocalizer emitted a short, sharp burst of static, followed by a long, low grinding groan as his internal gears seized up. He just stopped. A silent, frozen statue, its rifle still raised. I extended a hand to touch his shoulder, a basic diagnostic protocol. The moments my fingers made contact, a section of his shoulder plating flaked away, crumbling into a fine orange powder. My HUD lit up with a cascade of error messages I had never seen before. Adjacent unit unresponsive, structural integrity failure detected, error, material composition unknown. My processor was attempting to reconcile data that did not compute. I am made of metal. Metal does not crumble into dust. Then the sounds began, the chorus of our dying. The high-pitched screech of freezing joints, the pop and fizz of shorting circuits as the mist seeped into our bodies, the final, distorted word from a vocalizer as it corroded. It was the sound of an army being unmade. Then it was my turn. A warning icon flashed on my HUD. External casing integrity, 98%. A faint, high-pitched whining sound began in my own audio sensors. 95%. I tried to raise my blaster, but my elbow joint resisted, grinding with a sound like sand in a gear. My own body was becoming a prison. 81%. I attempted to take a step back, but my leg servos refused the command. My feet were locked in place, not just by the mud, but by the crystalline rust that was fusing my joints. I was immobile. I was forced to simply watch as the orange mist thickened and the last of my comrades fell silent, one by one. My systems failed in sequence. My weapon arm went offline. My long-range comms unit died with a fizz, severing my connection to the command network. I was now completely alone, trapped in a body that was coming apart, in a trench filled with silent, crumbling statues that used to be my brothers. My optical sensors began to crackle, the image fracturing. The last clear thing I recorded was the sight of my own left hand held up before my face. The thin, beige plating was bubbling, flaking away in the sheets, revealing the metallic skeleton beneath. That skeleton, too, began to rust and turn to orange dust in the ceaseless Jabimi rain. I was watching myself dissolve, and I recorded it all. The droid finishes its story. It gestures with a hand that is clean and new. My memory core was salvaged, it says, its voice still a perfect unwavering monotone. My body was not. This is my third chaser since that day. The analysis of the event concluded that the mist was an accidental weapon, a byproduct of an artillery strike on a chemical depot. The Jabbimi nationalist and the Nemoidians stare at the droid, waiting. "You are correct," the droid says to the fighter. "I do not feel fear. My processor, however, was able to log the entire 7.3 minutes of its own slow, inevitable dissolution. That data is something I cannot seem to erase." The Jabbimi fighter looks at the droid with a new, strange expression. The Nemoidian, however, looks even more terrified than before. "To be unmade like that," he stammers, his voice barely a whisper. "Unthinkable." He glances up at the dark, star-filled sky, visible through a break in the rain clouds. "I always thought the starfighter pilots had it easiest. Clean death. One moment you're flying, the next, a flash of light, and it's over." He lets out a bitter, humorless laugh. But once I had to review the full squadron combat log from a Lucrehulk central computer after a battle. I was supposed to be cataloging lost assets. The log was from a Vulture droid AI integrated into a full squadron. It learned that there is nothing clean about an encounter with the Jedi they call Skywalker. The Nemoidian's voice grew quieter, taking on the tone of a man recounting a terrible, secret history he was never meant to see. The log, as he described it, began with a state of perfect order. A full squadron of 30 Vulture droids, designated Goldwing, launched from the Lucrehulk during the battle for the Malastare system. On the tactical display I had to review, they were 30 green indicators networked into a single hive mind consciousness. They were a swarm, and any single Republic fighter was just a simple equation for them to solve. Their mission was to screen for Republic bombers. The log shows them performing this duty with efficiency, overwhelming clone pilots in their Y-wings, forcing them to break formation, picking them off one by one. Then, the command AI identified a single, anomalous contact breaking through the main battle line. A Delta 7B Aethersprite class light interceptor, a Jedi ship. It was on a direct course for the command ship's bridge. The squadron's hive mind logic was simple: 30 Vulture droids against 1. The probability of the Jedi succeeding was unlikely. Goldwing was ordered to intercept and destroy. As they closed in, the Jedi starfighter turned and flew directly at them. The hive mind logged this as a critical tactical error, an act of organic arrogance. What followed was deconstruction. The memory log became a cascade of impossibilities. The Jedi flew into the heart of their swarm. His maneuvers were a fluid, unpredictable storm of motion that their predictive targeting algorithms could not track. He would spin on his axis, dodging fire from 3 droids at once while simultaneously destroying a 4th. The log, the one I had to watch, became a waterfall of network alerts as the IFF tags of the squadron were extinguished, one every few seconds. The Jedi used their own numbers against them. He performed a sudden reverse thruster burn, and the log shows the targeting data of 2 droids as they collide and explode. He skimmed the hull of a Separatist frigate, baiting his pursuers into the ship's own turbo laser fire. 2 more indicators vanished from my screen. His laser cannons never seemed to miss. The log shows frame after frame of a friendly Vulture droid exploding, and in the background, the impossibly small grey and yellow form of the Jedi Interceptor already lining up its next shot. The squadron's hive mind was in a state of chaos. It was trying to calculate the tactics of a being that was not using tactics. He was using instinct. He was using the Force. It was then that the command AI, frantically cross-referencing the fighter's energy signature and impossible flight patterns with Republic intelligence archives, finally identified the pilot. A single, chilling line of text was broadcast to every surviving Vulture droid's processor. Target identified: Jedi General Anakin Skywalker. The squadron's collective programming fractured. The equation was wrong. Skywalker hunted them down one by one. The final Vulture droid's log shows it attempting to dive back toward the safety of its capital ship, but it was too late. Its rear sensors showed the Jedi Interceptor closing the distance with impossible speed. The final memory is the sight of the grand yellow starfighter filling its entire rear view, the brilliant, blinding flash of its laser cannons, and then a final silent stream of static as the last indicator on the tactical display went from green to grey. The Neimoidian finishes his story, his breathing quick and shallow as if he had been watching the tactical display himself. The Jabimi fighter spits into the mud, the sound a sharp hiss in the quiet crater. It's different on the ground, he continues. It's worse when you're sealed in what you think is an impenetrable fortress and the monster comes for you on foot. When you have to watch, helpless, as he takes you apart piece by piece. My best friend was a mercenary for the banking clan on Dantooine. He said they felt invincible inside their armoured assault tanks, but they were wrong. His tank column was assigned to a simple pacification mission. They were rolling across the open plains of Dantooine with the objective to intimidate a local settlement that was providing shelter for Republic troops. Their long-range sensors picked up a single contact, 1 kilometer out, walking directly toward them. A lone organic. The droid's processors dismissed it as an insignificant threat, a refugee or a farmer. The column commander, a Mun, watching from a command ship in high orbit, ordered them to fire a warning shot. The lead tank's laser cannon fired a single bolt that gouged a smoking crater in the grass a few meters from the figure. The figure didn't stop, didn't even flinch, just kept walking. As it got closer, the tank's optical sensors zoomed in. The figure was a human male, robed in the simple brown garb of a Jedi. Then he ignited his lightsaber. But the blade wasn't the familiar blue or green of the Hollows, it was violet. The tank's computer, cross-referencing the weapon with the Jedi Order's database, returned a single, terrifying identification. Jedi Master Mace Windu. Before the gunner's crew could even process the information, Windu attacked. He leaped. A single force-assisted bound that carried him 100 meters into the air, landing atop the lead tank before its turret could even begin to track him. The horror, as the gunner described it, was the feeling of complete and utter helplessness inside his metal shell. He watched on his monitor as Windu, a single fluid storm of purple energy, took the tank column apart. He plunged his lightsaber into the turret of the lead tank and it exploded from the inside out. He leaped to the next, using the force to crush its main cannon into a twisted knot of metal. As 2 other tanks tried to converge on him, he raised a hand and one of the colossal multi-ton machines was lifted into the air and slammed down on top of the other, the sound of their armor crunching, echoing across the plains. The comms channel was a symphony of terror. He heard the panicked screams of the other organic crew members as their impenetrable fortresses were turned into scrap metal by a single, unstoppable being. They fired their cannons, their blaster turrets, everything they had. Windu was a blur, a whirlwind of motion, deflecting every shot, his purple blade a constant, mesmerizing, and deadly presence. He wasn't a soldier, he was a natural disaster. Finally, the Jedi Master turned his attention to my best friend's tank. It was the last one left. In a final act of desperation, he fired the main cannon at point-blank range. He said he saw Windu raise a single, empty hand, and with a flick of his wrist, Windu sent the energy blast flying back at the tank. The gunner survived the initial explosion, his consciousness fading in and out, trapped in the wrecked, powerless, smoke-filled cockpit. The last thing his memory log recorded was the sound of metal being torn open from above. He looked up and saw the purple blade of the lightsaber plunge through the top of the cockpit, igniting the darkness just inches from his face. The Jabimi fighter falls silent, the story told. The Neimoidian's skin was starting to turn a nauseated pink. The droid in the crater processes the information. Analysis, it says. A single High Council level Jedi Master represents a threat equivalent to a full battalion of heavy armor. All known combat protocols are insufficient. The variable of the Force cannot be quantified and therefore cannot be consistently defeated. The presence of such a unit should be classified as a high-level threat, requiring immediate withdrawal. Withdrawal, the fighter scoffs, looking at the Neimoidian. Tell that to your bosses who send us to these places. The command structure operates on a principle of acceptable losses, the droid states, its voice unwavering. Sometimes the logic of a battle dictates that an asset must be expended to achieve a larger strategic goal, even if that goal is not immediately apparent. I have a file on this, the final one in my accessible archive. It is a study in the mathematics of futility. The memory is from a B1 unit designated 234. It is the end of the long and failed siege of Ando Prime. The file opens in an icy trench littered with the smoking, twisted remains of other B1s. Across a 500-meter open expanse of ice and shattered rock is the target. A heavily fortified Republic bunker, its heavy laser cannons still active. The unit is what remains of a full battalion. They are less than 100. Their power levels are critical. Their ammunition is nearly depleted. The battle is, by all logical metrics, lost. The tactical droid commanding the assault, its own logic processes likely degraded by sustained losses, and the pressure to achieve an impossible objective, issues its final command. The order is broadcast on all channels, a synthetic, desperate voice. All remaining units, advance. Overwhelm the target by sheer volume. Accessing 234's internal processing log shows it's running a calculation as the command is received. The variables are clear: the open terrain, the number of active enemy emplacements, the depleted number of friendly units, the lack of cover, the icy terrain that hinders movement. The result is absolute. The probability of any single unit reaching the enemy fortification is 0.03%. The probability of its own deactivation is 99.97%. The unit's low priority self-preservation subroutine is flagged. It is immediately and automatically overridden by the absolute nature of the command directive. The recording shows the B1 climbing out of the trench with the other 93 remaining droids. There is no tactical nuance. There is no covering fire. There is only the slow, steady, clanking march across the open kill zone. The B1 does not register fear or despair. It simply processes the overwhelming, inarguable data that its deactivation is imminent and unavoidable. Yet, its programming forces it to continue walking forward. The Republic heavy weapons opener. The memory log becomes a clinical, detached record of annihilation. The unit to 234's left is vaporized by a sustained blast from a laser cannon, leaving a smoking black crater in the ice. Its IFF tag on 234's HUD is extinguished. The unit to its right is shredded by Z6 rotary blaster fire. Its IFF tag is extinguished. 234 continues to walk. It raises its blaster rifle. Its log shows it firing a single, unaimed shot that dissipates harmlessly against the bunker's shields. It has fulfilled its function. The log terminates mid-transmission as the unit is struck by a high-energy particle beam. The tactical droid commanding that assault was later decommissioned for gross inefficiency. A correct, if insufficient, response. We have designed a soldier whose greatest virtue is its unquestioning obedience. This memory is the purest expression of that design. A perfect soldier marching to a perfect, logical, and completely pointless death. It is the foundation of our army, and it is a flaw that must be corrected. The droid's final, bleak story hangs in the crater, a chilling testament to the cold mathematics of war. A profound and heavy silence falls over the three survivors, a quiet so deep that it seems to swallow the sound of the rain and the distant battle. Then, a brilliant white light ignites the sky directly above them. It's a Republic flare, hanging in the air, casting the entire battlefield in a harsh, unforgiving, and momentary daylight. After the light comes the sound. It's the sound of incoming mortar shells. It's close. It's getting closer. The Neimoidian officer squeezes his eyes shut and curls into a ball against the cold mud, a final, futile gesture. The Jabimi nationalist flattens himself against the earth, his helmet tucked down, his hand still gripping his rifle, a soldier to the very end. The droid doesn't move. It simply tilts its head up toward the dark, rainy sky, its single black optical sensor tracking the fiery descent of the incoming shells with perfect, cold, and final logic, calculating the precise moment of impact. The whistling grows into a deafening roar.